know him. All right, y'all know I be shouting him out. Yes, honey, it's getting juicy already. Okay, so listen, hey everybody. Okay, so I just ran down here to give you all a quick update. At the end of the day, basically, the judge called everybody in chambers. Okay, there's a big to-do going on. Now, remember I told you guys on yesterday that there was some dispute because the prosecution was upset about the fact that Tina Garagos brought up this question about who determines the truth and whatnot. Okay, so today the judge is addressing that this morning before the jurors are brought in. The witness hasn't even been brought into the courtroom as of yet. But now basically they're in the judge's chambers because they're going over a conflict that they have with the Rule 403 evidence. Okay, so with that all being said, Rule 403 is basically a rule of evidence that gives the judge the right to exclude evidence that basically it's where its probative value is relative but is substantially outweighed by, you know, unfair or prejudicial, it being prejudicial to the defendant and also being confusing to the jury, or basically painting a narrative. Okay, basically it could be problematic. So with that all being said, hey Desmond, okay, so with that all being said, the judge has called everybody into chambers. He called in the lead attorneys from both teams, and then also he called in the witnesses, Jane Doe's counsel, and they've all gone into the judge's chambers to try to sort this out. Now, we still have issues going on with this juror number 6. I don't know what the issues are. They'll probably get to that later at some point after they come out from chambers. So anyway, the government also brought up the fact that Diddy was trying to flip the script. Now, remember how I told you guys that Diddy was sitting there unknowingly for Jane Doe. He was recording their conversation, but at the same time he's trying to act like he thinks she's recording him, and he's like, hey, are you recording me? Remember how he was trying to run game, but all the while what he was really doing was damage control. He was recording her, and he was saying things like, you know, we both did this, we both agreed it, you know, we both consented to doing these. It was just kinky sex, because at this point Cassie had already filed her lawsuit, and then he knew that Jane Doe had been complaining about some of the same exact things that Cassie complained about in her lawsuit. Not to mention, Jane Doe told him, you know, on a myriad of occasions, she basically told him that after reading Cassie's lawsuit, she said that it mirrored some of the things that she'd already spoken to him about. And then, of course, later, Diddy tried to play dumb and act like he never heard any of this stuff. Oh, you never told me that. I had no idea. I didn't know. Just running game. Okay, so they brought that up, and they said that with him having knowingly recorded her, unbeknownst to her, and the things that he was saying, they said we basically have to take that with a grain of salt, because how can we trust that he was actually telling the truth when he knows that he was recording this whole conversation? And of course, always the person who knows they're being recorded is the person who gets to paint the narrative. And of course, they're going to be careful about what they say, okay, because they're trying to get control of something, okay, of the narrative. So anyway, and then they also said that he likely knew there was going to be future litigation. So that's why he was trying to clean it all up, okay? Because he knew that it was going to come to a point that they may end up in court, just like he is right now. So they said he was feeding the narrative. And then also, again, that's when they brought up a 403 objection, which is exactly what that is, okay? Like I said, the judge can, you know, even though this objection, or even though the evidence that they're objecting to has probative value, it may also have cumulative value, and it could be confusing for the jurors and just cause a bunch of chaos. So what's more important? Getting that information out there, allowing that evidence to stand, or taking that evidence out and saying, listen, we're going to strike this from the record because it's only going to serve to confuse the jurors, and it's going to be prejudicial for the defense. So that's what the judge has been talking about. He said he's basically going to give a ruling on it later. Maybe he's going to give one while he's got them in chambers. So they say Jane Doe repeatedly said, I told you that I didn't want to do this. Okay, I told you I didn't want to do this. And that was one of the objections where the judge sustained it, because they're saying Diddy's acting like he didn't know this woman was upset, that she was bothered by some of these things. But then when you go look at her notes that she kept for herself, now she kept these notes in her phone. It was like a diary. Okay, and so they're basically implying that the defense is trying to make it look like she started saying these things when she heard about Cassie's lawsuit. But the truth of the matter is, she was saying this way before Cassie's lawsuit, because she already had these things in her phone in the notes. So this isn't something she just came up with all of a sudden out of the blue. She was already saying the same things. Okay, so then the judge sustained it. Now, at that point, they said Jane Doe, that was her way of keeping track of her thoughts. She was putting these things in her cell notes, and they're saying that the defense is trying to attack Jane Doe's credibility. Well, you know, that's their job. That's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to attack the credibility of anyone who is testifying against their clients in a disparaging way. That's their job. They're supposed to attack their credibility. How do you not do that, okay? They wouldn't be worth their salt if they didn't. So with that all being said, but here's the thing. They basically said that anything predating Cassie's lawsuit, that should not have anything to do, you know, with basically the things that she said absolutely predate the lawsuit. But they're saying if the things that she's saying were before the lawsuit actually came out, then how can they say that these things aren't relevant? And how can they imply that these things are not truthful? And how can they act as though she's saying these things to appease the prosecution? Because this is where she was speaking from the heart before any of these things, before the lawsuit ever came out. The bottom line is, once Jane Doe, this is my opinion, once Jane Doe saw the lawsuit from Cassie and she read through it, I think that the fact that she saw so many common similarities, some of the same things that she had been feeling and experiencing, I think that really bothered her even more, because then she knew, I'm not crazy, okay? I'm not over exaggerating, okay? Because Diddy kept gaslighting her. He kept trying to make her be convinced that this is what it was. It wasn't this over here, it was this over there. You wanted to do this. Now again, in some cases she did want to do it, in my opinion, but there came a time, as I told you all repetitively, when she got to the point that he's constantly having her sleep with all these different guys, and he's not spending any time with her, he's not taking her out, whining and dining her and any of those things, she started getting upset, started to feel like an object. She started to feel used and abused. And so no matter if somebody says yes 100 times, the time that they say no, that's when you have to stop. Okay, that's when you have to stop. Now, in my opinion, as I've said before also, I absolutely feel that she had, you know, the wherewithal to just put an end to it. But if she says that she felt obligated or whatever. But the bottom line is Diddy was absolutely coercing her into some of these things. Okay, he was pressuring her into some of these things, and then to continuously tell her, you know, bring it up the house and stuff like that or whatever, that's just not a good look. Okay? Look at Metaphor War, I think that's what it says. I can't really see it too good. It says free Diddy. I mean, hey, you might want a free Diddy. Now, with that all being said, the defense inquired on the grand jury rule of evidence 801A. Okay, the inquiry focused on a motive to not fabricate. Okay, a motive to not fabricate. Well, why would there be no motive to fabricate? Well, I'm so glad you asked, because again, Jane Doe is supposedly not at risk of being prosecuted. Now, she has admitted to things that are criminal for which she could have been prosecuted, but she's been given immunity, and I don't think that the feds would actively waste their time coming after her. I think they just wanted her to paint this narrative, or not paint this narrative, but to further prove their point about Diddy. You see, they're trying to prove the S trafficking. That's what her testimony is for. But not only are they trying to prove the S trafficking, they're also trying to prove the engagement, you know, going across state lines to engage in prostitution, which is in violation of the Mann Act. So that's why her testimony is very imperative for them. But the thing I find interesting is, at the same time, the prosecution is complaining about how Teeny Garagos, during the cross-examination, went through all of these different text messages. And they said that she was basically trying to paint this narrative that Jane Doe was complicit and that she agreed to do these things and that she, you know, she made a conscious decision. Well, I happen to agree with her, because I told you guys yesterday she was complicit. I mean, that doesn't make it right what happened to her as far as the beating and the whoops upside the head and all that, and feelings of being coerced. But at the end of the day, as I told you all, grown people have to take accountability for themselves. She absolutely was complicit in some of these things. I'm not going to say she was complicit in all of it because I wasn't there. But at some point, she was absolutely complicit in some of this. And so it was just interesting to me how the prosecution seemed to have an attitude that Teeny was going through all of these text messages, you know, during cross-exam. But that's exactly what they did. They went through all days worth of text messages. Okay, remember when I kept telling you guys we don't have any new information as of yet? Everything's being so repetitive. That's because they kept going through those text messages trying to prove their point. So now what Teeny is doing under cross, she's going through the same text messages that they already went through, and she's now trying to change the narrative. That's what the defense is supposed to do. Okay, so I don't know what their objection to that was. Now, I guess they're just doing their job. Okay, so anyway, they said that Teeny was trying to suggest that Jane wasn't forced and that she made an adult choice, okay? But then this young guy that's on the defense's team, pay attention to him. His name is Jason Driscoll, okay? He's making good arguments, okay? He just stood up out of nowhere yesterday and started telling the judge, you know, wait a second, Your Honor, this is not right. First of all, that's irrelevant. She's not trying to paint a narrative. I mean, he knows his stuff. And he looks like he's like 25 years old. I know he's probably a little bit older, but he was doing a good job. So he stood up today and actually corrected the feds, honey. Okay, so the feds were sitting there making their argument for the judge, and this young man stands up and he's like, Your Honor. He says, I need to correct them, okay? And then he said the law that they quoted was correct, but the law was amended December the 1st of 2023. Okay, he said this was way after Ventura's lawsuit. Because remember, Cassie's lawsuit was filed November the 16th of 2023. And he says, wait a minute, hold up right here. Okay, they're quoting this law and they're using that as their means for basing their argument off of this. But he said, wait a second, because that law was actually amended and the prosecution didn't seem to even know that he did. Okay, so shout out to him for doing his job is all I'm saying. Okay, now I give credit where it's due, no matter what side you're on, okay? So with that all being said, then Comey says that she doesn't see it. And then Jason Driscoll, he was just ready, honey. He stood back up and he gave her the whole spiel. He let her know, honey, this is what it is right here. I'm sorry if you're confused. Sorry if you didn't get the memo. Sorry if you didn't realize that in fact they admitted this law. Okay, so what you're talking about, you can just set that to the side and go read the facts and then come back and get with me. Okay, because he's on it. Now also, Miss Comey said, or the judge said that said to Miss Comey, he said, there's no indication of improper purpose or motive. And then the government says, well, Teeny Garagos, they basically started talking about her line of questioning again. And then that's when Jason Driscoll stood up again, okay, and he said that the probative worth of the statement, he started talking about the probative worth of the statement. And it has no value. He said, and if it has no value, it should be excluded. Reminded me of when Johnny Cochran said, if it doesn't fit, you must quit, okay? So the defense, they say they went through hours of text messages to depict Jane Doe's mindset, okay? They said they went through all of these hours of text messages just to try to get into her mindset, but wait a minute, what about Mr. Combs' mindset? Okay, it's also highly prejudicial, they said. And the government says, well, it's not about Jane's mindset. And then they said it's a 403 matter. And that's extremely probative and not cumulative is what they said. It's not cumulative. But actually, it sounds like it is. Okay, so they said the prior comments are, okay, they said, and then that's when the judge said, wait a second. He said for Jane's counsel and the lead counsel from both teams, let's go meet in the chambers. So they went up out of there. Let me tell y'all something. These women wanted the money. They did something strange for some change. End of story. Well, I have to agree. Like I told you guys, they did what they did for Diddy because Diddy had money. Because Diddy was funding their lifestyle. I'm not saying what he did was right, but at the end of the day, he quite frankly was funding their lifestyle. If these were guys that work at FedEx or Walmart, they wouldn't have done half of these things that they did or allowed half of these things to be done. Now that, however, does not negate the fact that Diddy still is nefarious and Diddy still introduced them to this lifestyle and he still was gaslighting them and still trying to coerce them into doing things that he wanted them to do. He is very self-serving. Okay, that's what he is. But like I said, this is all about accountability. Okay, you can't have your cake and eat it too. And you see, that's what happens. When people think they can have their cake and eat it too, that's where they mess up. Okay, because you got to take the good and the bad. You don't just get the good and everything's always going your way. You know, that person that's paying your bills and giving you all this money and sending you thousands and flying you around, they're going to want something. Okay, so when the devil comes knocking, it's just up to you whether or not you're going to let him in. And these women, in my opinion, absolutely let the devil in, and that devil is Diddy. Okay, so even though Diddy did nefarious things, he's not solely responsible for the things that they, in fact, allowed him to do. Because at any point, they could have said no, turned around, clicked their heels together, and went back home. All right? I'm not going in on them, but the truth is the truth. Now, some people are going to like it and some people won't. I don't really care. I'm just here to report the news and give you my information and my thoughts as well. Okay? It's not against the law to be a weirdo. Free Diddy. Well, you know, I don't think that Diddy should be freed because of nefarious things that I believe he did. I'm not really so much focused on this testimony from Jane Doe as to determine whether or not his guilt or innocence, but I think it's more so a bigger picture with whether or not they're going to actively be able to prove the RICO violations, the predicate acts, and all these other things. Okay, this is just a small piece of the pie, and as I said, they're using Jane Doe's testimony to try to build the case for the S trafficking as well as the violations of the Mann Act. And right now, you know, Jane Doe's about to get off the stand after they finish her cross-examination. It's not going to take too much longer. So I'm going to run in here because I don't want to miss a single thing. But at the end of the day, somebody said, where's J-Lo? Honey, I have no idea. Okay, J-Lo has absolutely nothing to do with this as far as I'm concerned. But, you know, I just want to let you all know that it's about to go down today. I can already feel it in the air. The judge taking them all in the office or taking them in the chambers to sort this all out. Both sides are making some very valid and good arguments, but if I had to choose whose argument was the best, I'm going to have to go with the defense. Okay? I'm going to have to go with the defense because even though the evidence does have probative value, it also can be prejudicial at the same time. And also, at the end of the day, we have to just call a thing a thing. Okay, Jane Doe is coming off now as hostile. She's coming off as not wanting to cooperate. She's coming off as if she's angry because Teenie under Cross is reciting to her her own words and then questioning her on it. Okay, please pay attention. With that all being said, I'm going to get out of here. All right, so anyway, with that, you know, everybody like and share this video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Each one teach one. That's how we grow and thrive. Do something productive, constructive, and never destructive. And always remember, lovers, to keep the Most High first in your lives.